video, I'm going to demonstrate the moves to solving this puzzle. So the task is black to move, and what is the best move for black? And this is the end game, and we have pawn at f4, we have bishop at f8, and it's also interesting to see this is a dark square bishop, and also the f1 square, which the pawn is going to promote, is a light square, and the white king is at the f1. So which means my bishop is impossible to push the king away. It's also impossible for us to opposing the white king to move it away, because white have like several pawns at the queen side. So how can we solve this? So white has 3 connected pass pawn. They are very scary. So the first thing we need to do is to stop this pawn in a way. And how can we do that? So white has 3 pawns. So we need to figure out, if I would play as my opponent, which pawn will I push? So I think the c pawn pushes pawn to c4 is not a good move, because we can take b4, and once these pawns are separated, it's really hard to protect each other, and so c4 is not the choice for my opponent. And the b5 is the c pawn is kind of separate with these two, which makes black bishop easier to control the pawns. So for example, if I move the king to f3 and b5, and also the b pawn is close to the king if we compare it with the a pawn. The king goes here, and if keep pushing to b6, so I can move king to d5, and pawn to b7, I can move bishop d6, and pawn to a5, king to here, and a6, king to b6. And my bishop is guarding b8, my king at b6 is guarding a7, and I can capture these 2 pawns. And the c pawn, as I said, is separated with these 2 pawns. So the best move for white, in theory, should be a5. First of all, the a pawn is very far from the king, so black is not able to catch up the a pawn with the king, because if you draw a square on the board, the black king is far away from the square, which means that the king will lose the race with a pawn. And another thing is, when the pawn at a5, these 3 dark squares are controlled, and this diagonal from g1 to a7 is critical for the bishop to stop the pawn. So if the pawn to a5, so the bishop has to use an extra move from d6 to b8 to guard a7, and it will take more moves than bishop to c5, because bishop at c5, it can control this 3 square in one move. But now if we have a pawn at b4, bishop c5 is not possible. And I will explain why when I move the pieces. So the best move, let's use another approach, like bishop g7. The purpose of this move is to push the c pawn, moving downward to c4, and then I can move the bishop to c3 to push the b pawn. Because as I said, if I can push the b pawn, I can play bishop to c5. I can move my bishop to c5, and this is super important because this is the best diagonal. I can control the pawns. So bishop g7, c4, bishop c3, b5. And what should I do? So if I move bishop to b4, the pawn will push to b6. So I have to guard the pawn with bishop to d6, for example, and the a pawn can keep pushing. So it looks like my bishop cannot guard 3 pawns at the same time. But what about like bishop a5? I can stop the a pawn with the bishop itself and also guard the b pawn. And pawn push to c5, I can go back to b4 to attack the pawn. If the pawn goes to c3, I can move back. So if white pawn I place at these 3 squares and I have bishop along this diagonal, I can guard these 3 pawns. So this is a pattern we need to be clear. So there are so many markings on the board, and I will explain with moves. So bishop g7. Okay, so white plays c5, but I can take the pawn and bishop a5. I can guard all the pawns. And here, after a5, white pawn has to move, and then I can promote my pawn. So yes, so this is correct. But we need to figure out the details. And let me switch to the analysis mode. So bishop g7, b5, and I move bishop to a5. And bishop d4 is also works. So, but I can explain the theory from this move. So c5 is the only move, and I play bishop back to b4 to kick the pawn. If it goes to c6, bishop a5. As I said, my bishop controls this diagonal, and all the 3 pawns are standing at light squares, and none of them can proceed. I can guard all 3 pawns, so white has to move the king if white doesn't want to lose the pawn. So if the pawn moves to b6, I can take this one, and if it go down, bishop a7, I can also guard these 2 squares. And if a5, there's no problem. I can maybe move the king. And if you move here, I can move king g2, then I can have a queen. If you move a6, I can take your pawn, guard a7. If you put a b6, bishop a7, and black still winning. What else? So a5, it's the same. Take the pawn. a7, I can guard this diagonal. b6, move the king. As long as you move once you move the pawn, I can take b6, b7, bishop a7. So this is how I can use one bishop to guard 3 connected pawns. And this is super important in bishop endings. And that's it.